The studio lights were barely warming up when the tension snapped, but the warning signs had been there from the moment Steve Harvey walked onto the set. His trademark smile was wide, his suit immaculate, and the audience greeted him with thunderous applause. Steve waved, joked about needing a bigger couch, and settled into his seat with the relaxed confidence of a man who had mastered television. Joy Behar leaned back, arms crossed loosely, watching him with an amused smirk that cameras caught for just a split second. At first, everything followed the familiar rhythm viewers expected: laughter, light teasing, and a few playful jabs about Steve juggling too many shows. The conversation shifted when Joy steered things toward comedy and culture. She tossed out a casual remark about comedians needing to evolve with the times, her tone half joking, half pointed. Steve laughed it off initially, nodding as if he agreed, but his eyes told a different story. He leaned forward, hands clasped, and replied that comedy had always been about truth, even when that truth made people uncomfortable. The audience murmured approvingly, sensing the energy change. Joy raised an eyebrow and shot back that truth wasn't an excuse to offend, and the smile on Steve's face tightened. What was meant to be a friendly exchange quickly hardened. Steve's voice grew louder, fuller, carrying across the studio as he spoke about decades in the industry, about surviving criticism long before social media existed. He joked that people today wanted comedians to apologize before they even told a joke. Laughter erupted, but it was uneven, nervous. Joy interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence, saying that influence came with responsibility. That interruption was the spark. Steve straightened in his chair, clearly irritated, and said he didn't appreciate being talked over. The audience fell quiet. You could hear a pin drop between camera clicks. Steve placed both palms flat on the table, leaning in, his booming voice now stripped of humor. He said he'd earned his place and didn't need lessons on respect from anyone. Joy didn't flinch. She fired back immediately, saying respect went both ways and that shutting down criticism wasn't the same as defending art. The co-hosts glanced at each other, some trying to smile, others visibly uncomfortable, unsure whether to step in. Cameras cut between close-ups. Steve's jaw clenched, Joy's lips pursed, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. The tension was electric. Steve stood up halfway from his chair, not fully rising, but enough to make the movement unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the audience. He said he came to have a conversation, not be lectured. Joy responded that conversations required listening, not just talking louder. The crowd reacted with a mix of applause and stunned silence, divided in real time. Behind the scenes, producers were already signaling frantically, waving hands just out of frame. One co-host tried to lighten the mood with a joke, but it fell flat, disappearing into the thick air. Steve shook his head slowly, letting out a breath that sounded more like a warning than a sigh. He said this was exactly the problem: people pretending comedy was dangerous while ignoring real issues. Joy shot back that words mattered, especially when millions were listening. Their voices overlapped, neither willing to yield an inch. Steve finally stood fully, towering over the table, and the room froze. He wasn't shouting now. His voice dropped, heavy and deliberate, which somehow made it more intense. He said he knew when he wasn't welcome and wouldn't sit there being disrespected on live television. The audience murmured loudly, some cheering, others whispering in disbelief. Joy gestured toward her chair, telling him no one was forcing him to stay, her tone calm but firm. That was the moment everything tipped. Steve nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and stepped back from the table. The cameras kept rolling as producers rushed in, trying to guide him off stage. His expression was controlled but burning, the kind of look that said this moment would not be forgotten. As he walked away, the audience erupted into a chaotic mix of applause, boos, and shocked chatter, fully aware they were witnessing something that would be replayed, dissected, and argued about for days to come. By the time Steve disappeared behind the curtain, the studio felt hollow, like the air had been sucked out all at once. Joy sat back in her chair, exhaling sharply, her expression unreadable as the applause and murmurs slowly died down. One of the co-hosts leaned toward her, whispering something meant for comfort or damage control, but Joy kept her eyes forward, adjusting her glasses with steady hands. The director's voice crackled faintly through the speakers, urging a reset, a transition, anything to regain control. The cameras stayed live, and everyone knew it. Joy broke the silence first. She said no one wanted a blow-up, that disagreements were part of meaningful conversation, but respect had to be mutual. Her voice was calm, almost measured, which only made the moment feel heavier. The audience listened closely, hanging on every word, aware they were witnessing television history unfolding in real time. Social media feeds were already lighting up, clips spreading faster than producers could react. Within minutes, hashtags tied to Steve Harvey and The View were trending worldwide. Backstage, Steve paced slowly, jacket draped over his arm, jaw tight. A producer tried to explain that things had spiraled, that it wasn't meant to end that way, but Steve waved it off. He wasn't angry anymore, he was resolute. He said he'd spent his life navigating rooms like this, smiling through tension, choosing humor over confrontation, but this time felt different. He felt dismissed, talked down to, and he refused to play along just to keep things comfortable. Someone suggested he issue a quick statement to cool things down. Steve nodded, knowing silence would only let others define the narrative. On set, Joy continued, saying she respected Steve's career but stood by her belief that public figures had a responsibility to consider impact as well as intent. A few audience members applauded, others remained stiff and quiet. The divide was visible, even in the seats. One co-host attempted to bridge the gap, calling it a passionate clash between two strong voices, but the words felt thin. Everyone knew this wasn't just passion, it was a collision. Hours later, Steve's statement hit social media. It was calm, deliberate, and unmistakably firm. He said he welcomed debate but wouldn't accept being interrupted or lectured, especially on live television. He spoke about comedy as a mirror, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes necessary, and said walking away was about self-respect, not ego. Fans flooded the comments, many praising him for standing his ground, others criticizing him for escalating the situation. The internet did what it always does, chose sides and dug in. Joy responded later that evening in an interview clip that aired online. She insisted the exchange wasn't personal, that it reflected a broader conversation happening everywhere. She said strong reactions meant the topic mattered and that she wouldn't apologize for challenging ideas she disagreed with. Her supporters applauded her for holding firm under pressure, calling it a rare moment of raw honesty on daytime television. Critics accused her of pushing too far, of turning a discussion into a spectacle. Behind the scenes at The View, producers worked overtime, meetings were called, footage reviewed, statements carefully worded. There was no undoing what had happened, only managing the fallout. Executives knew the clip would boost ratings but also spark backlash, and both carried consequences. Invitations to future guests were quietly reconsidered. Everyone understood that live television walked a fine line between authenticity and chaos, and that line had been crossed in front of millions. Over the next few days, the clash took on a life of its own. Comedians weighed in, some siding with Steve and warning about creative freedom being strangled, others echoing Joy's concerns about influence and accountability. Late-night hosts joked about it, podcasts dissected every second, body language experts analyzed pauses and glances. The moment was no longer just about two people, it had become a symbol of a cultural divide. Steve returned to his shows with his usual charm, but there was an edge beneath the jokes. He referenced the incident obliquely, talking about knowing when to leave a table that no longer served you. The audience roared, sensing the message beneath the humor. Joy, back on The View, addressed it one final time, saying she hoped people could disagree without demonizing each other. The words sounded hopeful, but the scars of the clash lingered. Long after the headlines faded, the moment remained etched in viewers' memories. It was a reminder that live television is unpredictable, that even seasoned veterans can collide when convictions clash, and that sometimes walking away becomes the loudest statement of all.